Hello, and welcome to the Saturday chat of the Men Human Rights Discord server. We are the semi-official Discord server of the humans, or men's rights subreddit. We are here every Saturday at 7 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Central. And today we have an interesting topic lined up. For those of you who haven't seen the title, called "Can MRAs Solve the Transgender Debate?" There are many transgender activists within the men's rights movement itself, and there have been many issues forthcoming of the trans movement recently that have to do slightly with discrimination against males and to a good extent discrimination against masculinity within the trans movement, which also makes things quite transphobic. So we have a talk about what the men's rights view and where men's rights can fit in with the trans movement. We also have articles today of current events that are going on in the world that are happening or being said about trans people. So if we want to discuss first what we think.
Well, I think that the first thing to get out of the way is that every MRA is going to have a different take on this. There is no one true take to rule them all. There's no there's no real way to at the moment to form one because to be honest, nobody really knows what to think about the transgender debate. It arrived so suddenly on the scene from the perspective of people who aren't already in the LGBT community who have been like dealing with like this sort of stuff for years. Um, it blindsided most people how quickly it arrived and how quickly it became verboten to get anything wrong regarding trans issues. But at the same time, nobody is really sure where the lines are or anything like that. That's why you're having these problems where a woman is standing up and saying, "Can you define a woman?" And somebody else is saying, "I'm not a scientist. Ask me something else." So I think that the thing we need to get out of the way first is that biological gender is a real thing. And that is something that we all have to deal with, trans or not. But that doesn't mean we should be rude or mean to people who want to be the other gender because they have dysphoria. And I think it is personally between that person and that person's support groups whether or not, well, how far they go with any kind of transition. It's up to them. And I do think it is polite if somebody introduces themselves as female to just go with it, or male, and you're not sure, just go with that. But at the same time, I don't think it's world ending if you get it wrong or if you don't want to go along with that. It's just rude. So we shouldn't, we should just clear all of this anger and hatred out of the door. And my favourite way of dealing with this is to say that whoever wants to, uh, you know, whoever says that they are transgender, just treat them as honorary members of the gender that they want to be a part of. Now, that doesn't mean they're biological members of that gender because we don't have the technology to change people's chromosomes and things like that. We barely have the technology to very poorly fake the sex organs of the opposite gender. So, it's going to be a long time coming before we can do that. But we should consider them, if they want to be considered that way, honorary members. That's my take other people may object, and that is fine. That's, it is an open debate. Other people may say that it should be classified as something of a situation where the person needs therapy. And I honestly think that they probably do need to go support just to, understand their own feelings on the topic, because there are people who will go on Tumblr and things like that, and people on Tumblr will say, "Oh, you like girl bands, so you're obviously transgender and you want to be a woman, or you like playing female computer game characters, so you're obviously transgender, or you like playing male characters as a female, so you're obviously transgender," when it's a lot more complicated and in depth than that to find out if you have dysphoria. And I am interested to see what's going to happen in the future, because at the moment it seems like both the UK and the USA have decided that transgender dysphoria is a medical condition. If I just post a link. So it is interesting to see what's going to happen with this. And I might post the same link twice there.
So I don't know how long I can be up, but I will just give the Eastern perspective or the Indian perspective on transgender people. So basically, according to us, the transgender people have been around for millenniums. In either Eastern culture or the Southeastern culture, the transgender people have a special role in the society. It was supposed to be special. They are usually looked down upon by the people, but in a very different way than in the Western countries. So in India, we accept that transgenderism exists, like the
Zader, I
body
think your
dysphoria.
mic's cut out.
Okay, I don't have my headphone right with me right now, so I'm just using my phone. Okay,
Okay,
bear
so
with me.
look down on. We didn't.
Yeah, look down upon because they think they are like lesser people, or or a god's mistake in some ways. They people think that uh, people really look down upon in some ways, but also they do have a social culture and economical place in the society, and always has been. In the West, people debate that transgenderism doesn't exist because they aren't, I think, quite familiar with it yet. But in Eastern culture, the transgenderism has been around for forever. Even I could find transgender character from books or religious texts dating back 2,000 years or 3,000 years. So in India, mostly whenever a child is born, or whenever there's a happy news in a family, transgender people, there's a transgender community, historical transgender community, that partake in some religious ceremony, or have some religious importance in India. That we believe, Hindus, we believe that blessing of trans people is really good, because they are more closer to God. And whenever a child is born, and whenever there is a happy news in the family, they come and collect money. But the problem for transgender people in India is that there are some stupid stereotypes, or some notion of them being involved in sex work, or the people being away from them, or considering them somewhat weird, or uh, like a freaks, or just Bollywood or movie or show depiction of them. They are not getting opportunities. These are like the points that are more Indian specific for transgender. They are really different from the trans problems in Western countries.
Mm. I mean, I will say that there is a dark side of the sex industry that does actively look for transgender people and try to groom them into that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean that all transgender people are involved in that, or even a majority. It's very hard to say how many, but it is something that they are preyed upon by the sex work. Well, by the darker side of society, let's say, and that's true of a lot of different groups of people, honestly. So, transgender people are generally, I would consider them in the vulnerable category because of the capacity for others to take interest in them that's unhealthy, let's say.
Yes, they are
So,
vulnerable all around the globe. I think they are the most vulnerable community in all LGBTQ, or one of the most uh, uh, ridiculed or made fun of community in the entire world.
yeah, in terms of vulnerability, I would put them alongside disabled people. No, I wouldn't say they're disabled, but I would say that they are at a level of vulnerability that's getting in towards that area. But then again, LGBT people are often skirting that line anyway, so um, yeah, it's quite an easy line to cross, especially if you don't know where it is. It's sorry, I'm talking at two different things there, but my what I'm generally saying is that we should try to support them, but at the same time, there seems to be a grand push in Western cultures to not so much embrace transgenderism as to start shoving it forward at an extensive pace, which is sweeping up non-trans people into what is essentially a bit of a fad that's dying out now. It's quite a dangerous fad as well, as there have been cases of children being, I wouldn't say they were common cases, but there are certainly cases of children being put on some quite extreme drugs that have altered their bodies. And I think that's too soon. I think that the earliest somebody should be talking about transitioning physically is when they're in their early 20s.
Well,
Uh,
or oh my God, this mic. I think the hard portion with that though is, and I'll bring up this art. I can't find it. I did not put it in our serial. Whoops. But I think the hard issue when it comes to transitioning is when you're a trans person, is that after you go through puberty, no matter how many rounds you take, it's a lot harder to full transition than when you're younger. I think that's a big issue. And then another one, if I can find it, it was an article earlier, and Turkey is like the capital of the swimming competitions. And they've officially determined that trans women are allowed to compete swimming competition on the international level. And yeah, I know, I'm sorry. Like it's
yeah, try to time your words for when your mic is working. Yeah, I know I have mic trouble all the time. I'm probably having it right now. But I, I do understand most trans people wish that they could have transitioned when they were children. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. But at the same time, there's also the cautionary tale of David Reamer, I think his name is. And what I'm getting at is that we can't detect transgenderism uh, exactly. You know, we can't really detect it. I mean, there are MRA scans that say that you can see differences in transgender people's brains and you can like, sort of pick them out. But that's not a test that's evolved enough or readily available enough that you could just apply it to any child who might be considering transitioning and come up with a definite yes or no. When you're a child, you go through a lot of different fads, and you it's not necessarily the case that just because the parent sees the boy dressing up in a frilly dress or the girl uh, dressing up like a boy, that the kid themselves actually puts any stock in the idea that they are the other gender, because children pretend all the time. They pretend to be all sorts of things. You don't have a solid identity or anything like that until you are becoming an adult, and even then, your identity continues to develop your entire life. So it's a child and even a teenager are still trying things out. They're trying to find out what they are, who they are, and I mean that's what all coming of age stories are really about. Who am I? So what I'm getting at here is that you can't latch on to something that a child is doing and say, okay, we're going to give them puberty blockers, which in fact are the drugs that they used to use to sterilize gay people and uh, let's say sexual deviants, and you give those to children and they are now incapable of reproducing. I don't know for how long, possibly for the rest of their lives. It could completely damage them forever. And then you start giving them drugs to transition them to the other gender as soon as they're a teenager or something like that. And we have no idea what this is going to do to children. Puberty blockers they stop the production of hormones which are vital for brain development and things like that. It's it's a very hinky situation. And while I have every sympathy, I think that the dangers strongly outweigh the benefits. Unless you have some sort of way to determine that the parents themselves isn't pushing the child into this, or the child isn't just doing this because one of their friends is doing it, or some of the random thing, like they saw it on TV, then you know, I mean, I just don't know how you would unpick that. It's hard enough to know if you're transgender yourself, if you're an adult, because like the feelings can be so mangled up in your head and you can start doubting yourself and things like that. I mean, my partner is actually going through this right now, and they're like, I mean, maybe I feel more comfortable if, I like being referred to as she. So maybe I'd be more comfortable as a woman, but I don't know. Because, it's not always cut and dried dysphoria. Sometimes with dysphoria, the person absolutely hates the sight of their own genitals. Sometimes they have mixed feelings about them. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they think they would rather have breasts or no breasts. Sometimes they just don't know. That's something that a lot of people don't really want to confront, is that messiness, that I don't know factor.
Another part of
That's
it too is
mm,
gender expectations. Sometimes it's not that they hate how they look or like anything on them, but it's they can't stand the expectations and stereotypes which come with what they currently look like. And so that confuses them because then they think sometimes that they have to despise what they look like because the stereotypes and the expectations come with it, even though they don't really hate it.
And it can be a case of not being actually transgender so much as having an extreme uh, trained psychological aversion to a particular gender. So they can hate that gender. I mean, you've seen it on Twitter and stuff like that, feminists hating men. You get the occasional MGTOW who's like, oh, screw women, and you just think how things would be if that person was that gender. You got the male feminist who hates men and who's saying, like the famous tweet, I want to link arms with all of them and jump off a cliff. And like they're projecting their own self-hatred onto men. And I do think that, several circumstances, I don't know how many, that quite possibly feelings like that could interfere and confuse the person. And I mean, there is a reason why trans people commit suicide at a much higher rate. And it's not just because people are absolute bastards to them. It's often because they don't understand what their minds are telling them. They don't, they don't really, you know, they don't feel comfortable in their own skin, but they feel like they should, but maybe they don't. And some people are saying, yeah, you should be the other gender and you should embrace it. And they're like, well, maybe, but maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe there's some things I like about my own gender, and it's not something you can really expect a child to go through. It's not really something you can tell a child, okay, you've made this decision at age, how old's that boy? 7. You can decide all of this at 7.
And
Now,
notice even, sorry, just to cut in really fast, notice the subheadline protects a 7-year-old to the heart of the fierce custody battle due to his mom's insistence. So how much of this are the parents who are the remnants of the hardcore SJW wave back around 2014? Now they have children, and now they think that they're on some ideological crusade to help their child escape heteropatriarchal norms, and they think that insisting that they transition is the way to do that. That's a very dangerous and that's a very scary ideology to have. And it's not remotely anti-trans to say that 7 years old is too young for transitions. I mean, it should be basic common sense. And I think the men's rights movement is in a good position to take that kind of rational, common sense ground, because we're not transphobic, so we're not going to say anything hateful about trans people. But at the same time, we like to think of ourselves as rational, so we can look at a story involving a 7-year-old and go, whoa, hold on, that's not right.
Yeah. I mean, if he actually wants to dress up and do that and go to school like that, I'm not going to stop him. But it seems very, very clear that this has been forced on by the mother. I mean, like I was saying earlier, you've got these radicals who really hate men, and like they have children, and some of those children are boys. And I think it was what was her name? That Australian woman, I can never remember her name, who said
Clementine Ford.
Yeah, I think it was her who had the little baby boy, and she was like disgusted that she'd had a boy, and she felt like her body had betrayed her by giving her a boy. And that's the kind of environment where a boy is suddenly finding that his mother is saying, "But you're a girl, really, aren't you?" And putting them in dresses and trying to, you know, get them interested in a lip gloss and whatever. And that's not healthy. Let's be
Like,
quite clear here. That is
That's abuse.
somebody else. Yeah, that is Pardon me. That is psychosis by proxy, essentially.
and like,
It's
even if you ask them the
psychosis.
question, like, if you put a dress and a suit in front of them, it's they could give you an answer, but they could feel like peer pressure to that answer if you're like, "Oh, but there's also the dress option." You mention it like 5 times, and then they feel like they have to choose that. They're just learning basic decision making at younger ages, much less bigger decisions.
Mm. I mean, it's not that like the forcing is what I have an issue with. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt wore a dress, so this isn't when he was that age, this isn't a big deal. Them
Yeah,
wearing the dress. That's not the part that anyone has a problem with, because I mean, little kids wear some really weird things, but
it's the
uh,
influencing and like the
yeah,
possible forcing and manipulating and like and
yeah.
and peer pressuring them possibly into that without meaning to or
Mm.
intentionally, whichever way.
Yeah, some people do it very, very intentionally. I mean, there was a case as well of I remember these two lesbians
Mhm.
who they demanded I mean, a girl from the clinic who was doing their in vitro fertilization thing, and they accidentally got somebody else's kid. And I can understand them being upset about the somebody else's kid thing. That's very annoying and that's frustrating and it's horror inducing and it's there's a little bit of body horror in that. And though when you calm down, you can realize that, oh, if I've got somebody else's kid, they've got my kid, we can just swapsies. And it's a situation that just calm down and talk to the people, maybe soothe them a little bit for mixing if you really want to. But what they seemed really pissed about was the boy part, that somebody had put this boy in her womb, and she's like, no, no, there's this alien monstrous man creature in my womb. And it's there's a kind of end of the world sort of humor to that. It's kind of there's a kind of, oh look, here's Western civilization crumbling in on itself sort of, ha ha ha, let's dance around the fire sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think another issue with that too is just that sort of leads a bit into the issue of masculinity and the fact there seems to be this culture that's trying to hyper feminize boys. And they keep claiming masculinity isn't bad, but then sometimes they do, depends on the group. But then it's like they're sitting here and creating this version of masculinity that's just feminization. And still, like the trans thing, there's an article. It's Utah parents who filed a complaint falsely claiming that this girl was trans and she had like a disadvantage because their son lost, I think it was like a running competition. And apparently there have been complaints by those parents, by other parents, that they thought she was too masculine. She looked too much like a guy. That was their main issue, was masculinity and masculine features.
I do think that a large part of what's frustrating the people involved with these events is that testosterone does give you an advantage in sports. Like that's scientifically proven.
Yeah, but here's the thing, the girl wasn't trans at all. They were just saying she was because she looked more masculine.
Ah, I see. Sorry, I
So they
misunderstood
falsely
you.
accused her because they were pissed off because their kid lost the competition, and they try to claim that this advantage because she was
Mm.
trans, and she never was trans in the first place.
Well, gender is there's a little bit of a spectrum there. If it's not as hard as when it comes to sexuality, but I should have phrased that slightly differently. But oh, Blue, did you want to say something? Blue, Blue.
Yes.
What's going on with your audio?
Oh no, sorry. There was just this annoying pop-up that keeps coming on my laptop.
Oh.
I was gonna say though, it's telling how easy it is to find feminists on Twitter openly talking about how much they hate men, including their own baby boys, and you never see other feminists condemn them. You never see other feminists condemn the Women's March for supporting Amber Heard. You never see other feminists condemn Clementine Ford for saying she hates her own son. You never see feminism condemn the sexist and toxic behavior of other feminists. Yet they're always the first ones to claim, well, that's not what real feminism is. Well, where is real feminism? Because when I go on Twitter and look up who the mainstream, popular, and majorly supported feminist organizations and figures, that's the kind of thing that I see. Where is this other feminism?
I mean, the
And it's
problem
interesting
is
how. Go on.
feminism's so separated, though. I think that's the issue. Is you've got Clinton Ford, Leanne Sanderson, you've got the organizations, you got people who call themselves feminists but are really equalists. It's really all over the place. I mean, a good
Well,
example is J.K. Rowling,
I was gonna say,
renowned, and
I
yet
was
she
gonna,
came out sort of against trans people with this whole Twitter thing, and suddenly they were like, "Oh, she's not really like part of our thing." But she's still a renowned feminist who will
and
be interviewed as
I was
well.
gonna make the point about turfs. You don't see any hatred towards trans people from the men's rights movement. Not that not that I've ever seen. Even from the red pill movement, even people like Andrew Tate were mostly indifferent at worst. I've never seen any actual hatred towards trans people come from any part of the manosphere. And I don't consider Andrew Tate to be a healthy part of the manosphere whatsoever. But it's worth noting. Show
You,
me hatred towards trans people coming from the manosphere, anywhere in the manosphere.
You know why that is, don't you?
Because
It's
we're not a hateful ideology.
it's not just that, it's most of the anti-trans rhetoric is actually based in misandry. Because
Oh.
the vast majority of it is against trans women who will make the point here generally born male.
Yeah.
And so all the rhetoric you see about them not being allowed into women's bathrooms and not being allowed into women's sports and what have you is based on this idea that they're evil because they're men.
Well, because here's the thing.
It's
I'm gonna take
basically
this.
gone.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
That's that gone. Gone, Takisha.
Well, I was just gonna take this. So, because I'm in the swimming world still a bit, and so one of the biggest things, obviously, was Miss Thomas and her start in the swimming world recently, and it's been a bit of a controversy because a lot of female swimmers, our sport isn't really that recognized. Like, let's be honest here. When you watch the Olympics, we're all here for Michael Phelps, and then they go into women's swimming the next hour and you weren't watching. And they work really hard, and there's really not recognition, which makes sense. Men's sports is usually watched more, and it's not a misogynist or misandrous thing, or it it's just something that happens. It's more popular,
Mm.
basics of the story. And so because of that, they feel like the accomplishments they do get is something, that they have to keep to themselves. So they do feel like it's an invasion because this is a person who was not born biologically female. And so from their point of view, someone who's not biologically female is taking away the progress of biological females within the sports field. And so that's been why there's such a controversy in the sports world, especially swimming.
I can remember, right, when I first started getting involved with all this stuff, the whole discussion was there's no biological difference between men and women. We're exactly the same, right? And now that you've got trans women going into women's sports and what have you, it's no, there's this massive difference. So, the chickens have come home to roost, as it were. And my thing, when I actually suggested that we just do this topic, was about how the men's rights movement has kind of got left behind in the discussion, because we aren't able to give an opinion on this without risking being called out by one side or the other. And what I mean by that is, if we come down fully in support of all trans people, then the feminists and the misandrists are going to turn around and say that, see, we told you, they're all misogynists, they hate women. And if we come down on the side of women, then we're in the position of being told, oh, see, look, we told you, all they're transphobic. So we're in a situation where we can't really win. And we've got to tread very, very, very carefully when it comes to this. There has also been, I think, for a certain amount from the sort of the manosphere, as it were, a bit of sitting back and laughing at all this going on, watching it all take place. So, this is a tricky one. This is a tricky one.
I think some of the issue is in among actual MRAs, there's too much, I would say, probably just centering on the loudest voices that are out there, from every angle, and not very much attention being paid to just, the day-to-day experiences of people that are transgendered, who, they aren't ideologically captured or have an axe to grind or whatever, or, they're not purposely grabbing the issues of transgendered people to exploit for their own purposes. And in this discussion here, I hear a lot of discussion of, like I say, the loudest voices, those that, at least to me, are, obviously more concerned with, destabilizing social order than they are with the condition of, some prepubescent child that, is exhibiting possible signs of dysphoria, or, some other gender related anomaly, about themselves that makes them stand out, and like I said, because of that, I think it is going to be very difficult for us to actually, voice an opinion that anybody's going to take much time to listen to, and it kind of goes back to that principle I've talked about before. If we never arrange anything so that those voices don't get any quieter, then, a reasoned approach, like Blue was saying, a rational and safe approach is not going to get that much attention. It just doesn't pull eyes the way, somebody like Clementine Ford does. If Clementine Ford at this point, I think, could probably sneeze and it would end up in print somewhere. But it's really only because of that, right? I mean, I don't think there's any doubt here that Clementine Ford is, she's not the soul of empathy and compassion. She just isn't, you know. And it's like that's why everybody pays attention to her, is because she's just so out of pocket that everybody's like, oh my God, what is she going to say next? You know. But that has always been and is now always going to be at the expense of some innocent 7-year-old kid living in Texas, being shuffled about because they're a little bit different. Um, and, my attention and my concern is always going to be for that, you know. But that's why I don't watch cable news and why I don't, read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. In other words, I'm not going to get what I need from any of those sources, right? But until we can, until places like this can become a source, that it can get some eyes, then, I hate to say it, but it might not make much difference what we think of transgendered people or their place in the world. I know a few of them, and, I pay attention to the ones, like I said, that, don't have an axe to grind. They just have a life to live, right? Whether online or in real life. And, what I hear a lot from them is they're already, after such a short period of time, what they are is really sick of being used as a political football, right? They really only want to lead their life. And like I said, my opinion, the MRA stance should be in favor of that. Allow them to just be, and to disincentivize the voice of people that all they want to do is take advantage of those people's misfortunes and difficulties. So that's my take on it.
As usual, it's hard to argue with a voice of reason there. I do think the men's rights movement has a larger part to play in the discussion, without obviously forgetting the fact that we are dealing with individuals with individual lives here. I think we need to be involved somehow. I just don't know how that's going to look without causing ripples that we maybe don't want to cause.
I think really one thing that springs to mind is there's another set of loud voices out there on the opposing side of all this. I'm thinking of people like Matt Walsh, and all the folks over at Daily Wire and PragerU, and when they're not being kind of obnoxious and mocking and putting on a performance, when they speak among themselves, what they talk about is that things like acceptance of transgender people, as just part of the mainstream, is a direct threat to civilization, and the men's rights movement has an opportunity there to stand up and say, A, we don't believe that, and B, you are welcome here. And if the, if the ideological pool that you're swimming in is too uncomfortable, but this other extreme wants nothing to do with you, you're certainly welcome here. One thing I've said about transgender people that gets very little traction anywhere is the position and the issues faced by transgender men. They just don't get very much, airplay because there aren't as many of them, and a lot of the, I guess you would call it transition technology, is really not that complicated. If you go, a certain number of months on testosterone hormone replacement therapy, you start looking like a dude. I mean, it just, that's how the world will see you, but then the problem there is then you start getting treated like a man. And we all know what that's like. But it's so, like I said, it's an issue, but we don't talk about it as much uh, among ourselves or to the public because it just doesn't occur to us that, that group of people, that group of men has a particular set of issues. In the turf world, they accuse trans women of not having had the experience of growing up, from girlhood into womanhood and all the, challenges that brings up. Correspondingly, a transgender man probably, you know, doesn't doesn't have as much experience going from boyhood into, pubescence and ultimately transgender manhood. So they miss a lot. But like I said, we know that, that's not something to blame them for. We know that that's something, to help them like navigate, you know, and help them make sense of, right?
Yeah.
But if they don't show up here, we never get the chance to help.
Mm.
And that's probably bad. I just very lately hear a lot of really troubling things about, what's going on with the trans men, right? Like I said, the good news is a lot of the transition is hormonal. I mean, there can be some surgery and things like that involved, but it's not even, necessary. But the problem is once you transition, even if it's just hormonally, people start treating you like a man, and being treated like a man sucks. It just does. And then they're really let down. I mean, uh, if their motive for transitioning in the first place is severe dysphoria, right? Like the mental and psychic condition of gender dysphoria, they overcome that with the transition. Like I said, then they're looked at they're treated in the world very differently. And like I say, you just, unless you go look for it, you really won't even see that, right? You really won't
Yeah.
even find that kind of discussion, but it happens,
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
and it's baffling. It's as baffling for them as it had been for us when, we suddenly started growing armpit hair and our voice dropped.
Mm.
Suddenly, we're going from, darling little boys to I'm not sure what. I mean, I've said to people probably in the wrong spaces that we go from being darling little boys to monsters just because, like I said, we hit puberty. And of course, everybody comes back with, "Oh no, 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 that's not." I'm like, "Yeah, it is." Yeah, it is. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and if a transgendered man, has that experience like on purpose, like as something they go and, like have done, then it makes it that much worse just because, uh, th- th- they could have not done that, you know, they could have just gone ahead and lived out their life as a woman who's, a little different.
Mm.
And it's like, yeah, I get that, but you know, um, then, the community and the culture at large has to make a decision,
Yeah.
that we have to decide that whether trans or cis, being a man is really not everything it could be, and probably not what it ought to be, but it's like the rest of our issues. We're never going to be able to fix that by ourselves. Earlier today, I was watching a lot of very heavily intersectional feminist media, and I mean, the same drum gets beaten, right? That men must change, and men must become X, Y, and Z. And it's like same way it's always been, at least for me. That, well, okay, A, change into what, and
Mm.
B, you know, I hear you sort of kind of mumble about, you're going to need some help with that change, whatever it actually is. Um, that the jury's still out on that, what we're supposed to be changing. But, the point is that if we are left to try to do that ourselves, right, then, the next Andrew Tate, right, and the next Fresh and Fit are waiting in the wings for that, right? They really are. I mean, they're just like champing at the bit, because that is like free money to them, right?
Mm.
That's handing them financial and social success on a silver platter,
Yeah.
right? And it always has been,
Mm.
right? For every difficulty, especially that men have to face, there's always a con artist waiting right around the corner to solve all of his problems, for
Yeah.
the low price of, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, the thing we can do, if we're so inclined as MRAs, is to say that, we offer an alternative, but we're not here to exploit you regardless.
Mm.
What we're here to do is help, and what we're here to do is, uh, I say, quiet those other voices. I'm just
Mm.
as interested in quieting Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit and and Pearly and all those. It's like, go ahead and express your opinion. I don't even agree with Andrew Tate being, banned from social media, but it's like, you know, it has to be seen for what it is. It's just a hustle. It's just uh, you know, for money and influence, fame and fortune.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally just the male equivalent of the Proudmans and the all of these people who these feminist sociopaths who teach young women to be terrified of men and who push this ideology of hatred and do so for power and influence and because it makes them feel good to crap on men.
And again, money. Whether it's Gloria
Oh yeah,
Steinem,
buckets of money.
Bendel, or Clementine Ford, or Jessica Valenti, they get cash.
Mm.
I hate to be like cliche about it, but anytime I see that, I think follow the money.
Yeah.
How are they collecting it and from whom, right?
Mm.
I can
Some
actually
of
go
them,
teaching positions, nice fancy public dinners, trips to the
yeah,
UN to talk to them about how their new laws are going to be, instituted and things. Trips to
yeah,
the government,
yeah.
consultation fees,
Hmm.
donors, Patreon.
Hmm.
The flood of money is endless.
I
Yeah.
will say one thing that's come up in the news very, very recently. We actually, last month, or I think it was, we
Hmm.
lost a temporary trans man who I think we in the MRM should actually consider a bit of a heroine. And I know you and I don't like that particular arc, Taz, but
Yeah.
I'm sure you know the story of Nora Vincent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately, she died very last month, I think it was, in
Mhm.
Switzerland. But you know, she did this whole book and everything else about her year living as a man
Yeah.
and things that she found.
Yep.
And yeah, as I say, we should regard her very, very highly for what she did.
Yeah.
Also, um, I know you're not particularly high on the manosphere and everything, and sort of the red pill content creators, particularly on YouTube. The one that has covered there's a story about 2.5 years ago on trans men detailing their experiences post transition, and Better Bachelor, obviously, who's a you know MGTOW or
Yeah.
what have you. He covered it on his YouTube channel, and the video's actually up. I might post that in a minute. And that was, certainly something worth listening to. If I'll say I'll post that in a sec, and people can watch that, and I'll post the Nora Vincent video as well. Although it's a few years old now,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know.
No,
So
like Nora Vincent in particular, you know, the sacrifice and the heroics, it's it's like from my perspective, all of that really showed up, after the hoopla kind of died down, because everybody mentioned sort of as a footnote, that she ended up kind of breaking down a little bit and having to, get a bunch of therapy and reassess her life. But that was all after, the book and I think it was an ABC, feature about, in other words, once the lights got shut off, then she got memory hold, right?
mm,
And places like this, that's where, I didn't know anything about Nora Vincent until I joined with you guys, and we're the only ones sort of keeping uh, that heroism alive,
mm,
because, like I said, it's that was a pretty straightforward and honest and unmotivated process that she went through. I mean, she did it because she did it. Another one I can think of like that really is Cassie J. I mean, she didn't come into it with a pro MRM agenda, right? But she did manage to come into it with her moral frame, with both of them, with their moral frame, intact,
mm,
right? And that's what, like, that's why you don't hear much, from Cassie these days either. It's not that for lack of trying. It's just that somebody that, takes an honest look at any of this stuff with, with a moral consistency, they get like disappeared,
mm,
they just go away, right? Because they're not as dramatic, and not as eye catching. They're just honest, you know.
yeah. I,
And what the heck is so popular about honesty,
mm,
right?
I I certainly wouldn't describe Cassie J as un-eye catching, but that's another story for everyone.
Yeah,
And she,
yeah. That's really the heck of it is, um, even as, I mean, yeah, she's pretty and everything, but also, she's uh, she's got that particular kind of personality where it's very clear she's really intelligent and
oh
really,
god, yeah.
experienced and well trained. She's got her stuff together, right?
Mm,
But she has, like I say, she's honest and she also exhibits humility, right?
yes.
And in the popular culture, that's just anathema. Anybody
Mm,
that's both honest and humble, that's just not done.
Yeah.
Yeah, people forget when she started making the red pill, she was a feminist and she was intending on making an anti-men's rights documentary. And then she was convinced during the process of filming, as she was talking to feminists and MRAs, she realized that she was on the wrong side all along, and she actually changed her mind during filming, which is pretty incredible.
I think she said she changed once she'd finished making the book and making the film, and she was on the promotional tour. That's when she realised she'd
Yeah,
backed the
it
wrong
was
horse.
the promotional tour, and also how she was treated during the
Mm,
post production process.
yeah,
Once they found out, what she was allowing her subjects, her interview subjects to say, and how she was making them look, her angel investors, all the money people shut her off, went dark on her. And between that and like her experiences down there in Australia and all that, it's like, I don't blame her. I would have quit the game too. I would have
yeah,
said, you know, uh, if this is what feminism really is, then I'm just not going to be that,
yeah, yeah.
And
I mean,
like I said,
she's
you have to hold on to your soul to be able to do that. And it's not as easy as it looks
yeah, she
these days.
obviously she's gone off now. She's very much the married mother,
Yeah,
but she's still involved with Warren Farrell,
right.
who I think must be some kind of like surrogate grandparent or whatever for her son, because she and Warren seem to be very, very close, which, I think that's great personally. If there's anybody within the men's rights movement that I would want to have as a close confidant, it'd be Warren Farrell without a doubt.
Yeah,
But
me too. Me too.
I
Like
think
I
we are.
said, she was willing to, like pay the price to put this out there and do it honestly. So, after the way she was treated for it, same thing, who else would she be able to, to turn to and, to collaborate with? Is this, there's
Yeah,
not much else going on out there.
no,
If she wanted to do a new film, I'd be happy to fund it to as much as I
Yeah, me
possibly
too.
could.
Yeah, I'd help. I know she had some sort of preliminary plans to do another documentary on trauma, which is very near and dear to me, of course.
mm,
But same problem. If you go at it honestly and with a willingness to hold on to your morals, it's not going to be easy. It's not easy for me. Right.
mm,
And I'm not making a documentary, I just do what I do. But even so, I mean, uh, it takes quite a lot, and I can't do it, on a big stage because that's just not how it's done anymore. You know,
mm, mm.
and
I
until
find
that changes, then, like I say, we can say whatever we want about issues like transgender issues and transgender ideology, because we're going to do it from the perspective of fairness and honesty, and humility. And people don't care about that. They just don't.
well, SJWs don't. And I think the big thing there was she outed the SJWs before they'd even really gone into their massive, uh, like, gluttony of whatever you want to call this
Yeah.
zeitgeist, this
Right.
yeah. Before that happened, she outed them, and they didn't like that,
No,
and they
no, they
turned on
didn't. No. And like I said, that's, if you take it, if one takes a step back related to all the various intersections, if you take a step back and say, what are these people actually trying to accomplish? And what it really looks like more than anything else is a determination to destabilize, the culture and the communities that exist within them. And, you can say, well, they're only doing it so they can replace it with something better. They just never say what that is, you know.
That's what deconstruction is. It's destruction, deconstruction.
Yeah, yeah.
And they don't want to replace it with anything else.
Well, maybe not, I mean, I'll be honest with you guys, I'm just about fed up with the status quo myself, and I am one of those people that, is pretty convinced that things like economic capitalism and uh, uh, you know, private ownership of means of production is not going to last much longer. I mean, I think we're just about done with that in maybe the next couple of generations. But my point is, if you're more focused on, trying to get it to burn down faster, and there is no focus on, what we ought to be doing next, then, as you say, after it burns, there will be nothing, you know. And human history is that, we've spent most of our history with nothing. Civilization and technical advance and, ordered and disciplined social and philosophical um, pathways are really recent, compared to the rest of our history. And what that means is, if we burn it all down and we don't have something waiting in the wings to put in its place, what we'll have is what we've had for most of our history, and human life being, what was it? Uh, Solitary, brutish, dark, and short. That was most of human history, and we can go back to that, right?
Major
So
issue though is someone's profiting all the time from the downfall. Someone wants it to continue to burn because they're making money from the burning.
yeah, they're doing a short-term con, you know,
Mm.
which again, moral rectitude out of the way, that makes sense. As long as you don't have a soul, that looks totally logical, you know. But unfortunately, humans have, other than a strictly selfish and self-centered experience in life. I mean, most of us at least want to try to care about each other and love each other and get along with each other and function. But there are some people that are just not wired up that way, and the the willingness that too many of us have to hand all the power and influence over to them means that we're going to get, what we're asking for, which, like I said, is nothing. you know we're going to be we're quickly putting ourselves in a position where, our descendants are going to look back at us hatefully. I mean, I won't, because my descendants don't exist, but for the rest of y'all, you know, you have to consider the idea that what's going on now and what we do about it, is going to have an effect on what your distant, legacy is going to think of you, right? If they look back at you from a mud hut while they're, getting ready to lay down on a straw mat to go to bed, they're not going to think kindly of you. They're going to be mad at you, because compared to, what they face on the day to day, we live in paradise, right? You know, this is a really unique time to be living in. And, you know, if we're not careful, we're just going to waste it. They will be mad. You know, they will not forgive us.
It's worth noting as well that I've been saying for a long time that the pendulum is swinging and that we should make sure it doesn't swing too far, because it is swinging, and it is at the point, I'd say, round about the middle. We're about to start really swinging into dislike of all of this stuff. And the only thing that's really going to protect feminism from the absolute distaste of society is gynocentrism and the way that everyone gives women a pass. Honestly, it is the only thing that's going to stop it from being treated as absolute scum of the earth. But LGBT people don't have that protection. And I have a hunch that homophobia is going to rise, and I have already seen indications that the next generation is going to be more homophobic.
Yeah, it will.
Mm.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it
it
just
is
will.
the fault of these SJWs not simply allowing people to live, but jamming everything down their throats and saying, you're evil for not, supporting this enough. No, you're not supporting enough. You're still not supporting enough. You're evil. You're evil. And people are going to turn on the LGBT people and say, this is your fault, when 99% of them have never participated in any of this. And it's going to, like, people think trans lobbyists are the most woke, crazy people of all. No, no, it's actually a tiny, tiny proportion of trans people, and I'd say quite a few pretenders as well, who are just in it because they think it can be used for clout. You know the exact sort of person I'm talking about,
Oh, yeah.
and
Like smugly puff.
yeah, and the moment that I was also thinking of Dice's scum as well. That Dice's scum person has turned into the most girly girl you have ever seen in your life, and I respect that she got out of it, and I don't want anyone to go bothering her. But it doesn't change the fact that the moment this blowback really starts to blow, these people are going to evaporate back into society, and the real LGBT people will take all of the brunt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
It's
honestly
already
think that,
begun. You know,
yeah,
it's already started. And, mentioning just uh, activist homophobia, like I said, that's already started too. I
There's
yeah,
hear, all the time, gay men are the white men of the gay community. I'm like, wow.
yeah, that's
That's
SJW
awful.
saying that.
It's really
SJWs
awful.
means
Yeah. And
I
SJWs back in like 2016 started to talk about gay privilege, and they've been sort of slowly edging it into the mainstream as
mhm,
because honestly, SJWs have always been homophobic. What people don't realize is that the SJWs are the most homophobic, they are the most racist, and they are projecting their opinions onto other people. Sorry, carry on.
I was about to ask, which part of the LGBT community do you think is really going to cop it? Because I would suggest, if this is going to go the way you think it is, it's going to be gay men. I
Without a doubt, it's not going to be lesbians.
Yeah,
It is not going to be lesbians.
yeah.
It is going to be I'd say a coin flip between trans people and gay men. I think actually I'm leaning more towards trans people taking the brunt of it. And I say that because people are getting really upset about it now. like the whole swimming thing has really, really like it's really turning people against trans people in that they feel like they're invading, uh, like they're using it as a way to attack women, and that is dangerous. The worst thing you can possibly be in society is seen as attacking women. And I knew as soon as that started happening that that was when the real blowback was going to start, because it
And it's
wasn't
not
the
just
Johnny
that
Depp thing.
either. It's like it's everything with like trans women, honestly. It's sports, it's the
Mm.
bathroom debate, it's one of the things J.K. Rowling that they were calling out was the fact that she tried to claim that trans women were taking the place and jobs of women in the work field.
Mhm.
Okay, that's kind of disgusting. I can
Yeah.
understand sports to a degree, but jobs generally, that's just weird. But anyway, the what I was going to say is we've now got people noting that rapists are have cottoned onto the trans thing, and they're saying they're women to get into the women's prisons. And I don't know how much truth there is to this. I don't know how far it goes, but the people who don't like trans people have latched onto it, and they're going to hammer that for all it's worth.
Yeah.
And it's
See,
going to be used to flog the LGBT community.
see, this has started my gears going now, right? And I'll tell you for why, because it goes back to my original premise when proposing this conversation. I'm now starting to see a path where we can get involved in this, and I do think make a positive impact. And that is, some people aren't going to like this, but we can hit back at the turf feminists, the trans exclusionary radicals, because we can point out this isn't trans people that are doing this, or whatever. It's it's the radical feminists that have been doing this. They're the ones that have been pushing all sorts of stuff in the background and bringing it into the mainstream. It's the SJW crowd, and unfortunately, yes, we've taken a backseat and just let it happen. But I do think this might be our way to make a positive impact.
Well, and I think another thing too is that victimhood loses power when it's shared.
Mm,
So, if you look at feminism, they try and either adopt every movement or attack it subversively.
mm.
So that's what they did with the men's rights movement, right? They said, "Oh, well, you don't need a men's rights movement because we care about men's rights too." No, that's a lie. And then they tell you to shut up because they never actually have an argument as to why they or how they support the men's rights movement. In fact, you can
Well,
prove
then
that they
they
do quite the opposite.
and then they do co-opt it. They attempt both at the same time because they create men's communities such as Men's Lib, which of course is just feminist control in disguise when you look at what the sub actually promotes and what the rules are. Even though that sub is and has been for a few months now, really starting to show some cracks and really starting to show some strain as it becomes harder and harder for the mods to keep up the lie and for the regular users to suspend their disbelief as to what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. So feminism is supporting their version of the men's rights movement, which is fine to exist provided they control it. Men's rights
Yeah.
movement that are independent, such as us, or any men's group that is not under control by feminism, feminism immediately senses as a threat and will immediately attack. So it's very telling to me how feminists insist that nothing can be valid unless it is pro-feminist. Nothing can be valid or worthwhile unless they are in control. It
Yeah.
speaks to the narcissism.
I
Well,
just
and
want to
that's
get
exactly what I was saying. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. I just want to get one little thing out before we finish this off tonight. There was a conversation that took place last week before last week's stream. Taz was in there.
Yeah.
It was one of those discussions that I wished we'd recorded because of how it was intense, wasn't it, Taz? But
Yeah.
it's one of those ones, if people out in the outside world would hear it, they'd realize how important not necessarily this group is, this movement is, but I also don't want it to be recorded because it was so intense, it was so personal on occasions, and that's not for everybody to hear.
It's true. And, like I tell people that are more, like SJW or feminist leaning that, that I'm close to, which there are many, I tell them if you honestly believe that our movement is flawed or insufficient or whatever the case may be, help me fix it, right? I mean, if you fear that we're too adjacent to, the actual manosphere, red pill, Andrew Tate, all that, if you feel, help me create a space between them and us, because it's not that hard, right? I mean, there's none of the people I can think of that are in my circle who are like that wouldn't fit right in this discussion, without ripple and without a big firestorm of debate. They wouldn't agree with everything we talk about here. Hell, I don't agree with everything we talk about here, but just like them, I understand that, none of this, none of the reason and the common sense that Blue was talking about is that easy to come by. We're not just born with it. Right. And when I explain it to them that way, then they're like, yeah, you're right.
Well, and
There
another
was,
thing I think too is that, I think that there's three main types of feminists, right? You have, pro women, you have egalitarian, and then you have pro supremacy, right? They don't want women's rights, they want women's supremacy.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think being an egalitarian is a bad thing, right? You're not really a feminist, but I don't think that that's a bad thing. And I don't think necessarily being pro women is necessarily bad either, right? It doesn't detract from mathematics that we have specialists in physics. But at the same time, the problem is that the media and the organizations, both of which hold all of the power for this movement, are not run by either of those groups. They're run by that small group of radical feminists. That's who you see in media. That's who you see perpetuating their nonsense, right? And that's who you see influencing politics, influencing laws regarding, rape, all of that stuff. So that's
yeah,
the problem. And,
And the
yeah,
problem
you
is
know,
they have made themselves the voice of everybody else. They have made themselves the
exactly.
organizations. They're the ones creating all these quote unquote programs that are supposed to help everyone. They're the ones who are saying, oh, and here's the thing too, they get extra funding. And this is something you guys may not know, but they get extra funding for like each group they say they're helping as well
yeah,
and giving to. So if they add BLM, if they add LGBTQ, if they add women
yeah,
minorities, because
yeah,
minorities is their own area, they get more money for it. But
right.
it's so they claim all of this, but it's so I'm sorry, you guys got me on this now.
Well, it's true because as I've said before, this conflict is extremely asymmetrical. You know, and our side of it is not only very low on resources and influence, but also, quite frankly, it's full of traitors, right? It's full of men more than willing, to bend the knee, right? And
Well,
so, the thing that we can take advantage of, like I said, is the fact that, we're malleable. We can be influenced.
Yeah.
If somebody is worried that we're, uh, uh, too, or that we are at all misogynistic or at least ignorant, I tell them all the time. I say, if you honestly believe I'm that ignorant, educate me. You know, I might not believe everything you say, at least not the first time you say it, but I will listen. My point is that your power structure does not. It doesn't even listen to you.
Well, and that's the thing. So I've said this before, and I actually put it in the I argued this point in the rhetoric server. I don't know if you guys ever been in that debate server, but I was arguing against feminism in that server, and I put the conclusion that I wrote in the Saturday text chat. But I mean, it's a neo-authoritarian movement, right? What you are individually isn't really as important as the application on the large scale when we're talking about the validity of the movement. And the movement itself is neo-authoritarian and falls prey to radical feminism, right? It's like saying, oh, well, there were harmless Nazis. Yes, but the overall movement, okay, was killing millions of people. That's kind of a problem, right? So
Mhm.
oftentimes, they say, well, not all feminists are like that. Well, no, they aren't. I agree. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about, the moral composition or the ideological stance of all feminists. We're talking about the effects of their movement and its validity. And their movement is entirely based on radical feminism.
Right. Yeah, Lear Keith, 20 years ago, very publicly said, our position is that, the individual is not the thing that matters. It is the group. It is the collective. And, I mean, like I said, there are some things to be said for subsuming the primacy of the individual in favor of the group. The point is, it has to be voluntary, it has to be wholehearted, and it still has to end up benefiting the individual. If you can't do that, it doesn't matter, how righteous your cause is, it will fail. The kind of governments and economic structures that have tried to do that so far, have collapsed into dictatorship, within a generation. You say whatever you want about capitalism, but at least, it keeps rolling for a while, right?
Yeah,
And
their causes lost righteousness a long time ago. Their cause is now just about building their supremacy around everywhere, and their downfall is going to be what they've done to get there by trying to make everything to their standard. I mean, we already, as we just brought up with Painter and like Ma, we're already seeing the downfall with LGBTQ and TERF's argument. We're seeing the downfall with African American feminism
yeah,
making its own segue away from normal feminism.
yeah,
We're seeing it happen all over. They're crumbling on all sides because their foundation was built on confusion that they
yeah,
thought was solid, and then they confused themselves even more, and now they're just falling apart because
yeah.
it's gone to a damaging extreme.
So the challenge for us really is to, to help the victims of all that pick up the pieces. I've said this before. We've ridden so far and so long on, uh, kind of, alienating a lot of people who meant well but just went down the wrong path. And I say the time for doing that is over. That it's time to make peace, with the people that fall out of those corrupted places and have nowhere to go. Say, look, you're more than welcome here, and if you think we're messed up, help us fix it. But we do it differently here. We will not do to you what they have done to you.
Yeah. Well,
And
anyways,
we
we're
have
gonna.
to make it clear. Go ahead.
I was gonna call it because it's been going a while. So, thank you everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming to our Saturday live stream on the Men Human Rights Discord channel, the semi-official Discord of the Men Human Rights subreddit. We hope to see you here next week with 7 p.m. UK, 1 p.m. Central, just 2 p.m. Eastern. If you ever have a topic you want us to bring up, you can always message Men Are Human, Blue, or myself. We always love hearing from you, and it's been an awesome week. See y'all next week.